Welcome back to our exposition of Nietzsche's Prologue to Thus Spoke Zarathustra. We're looking today at Prologue 2. We'll get right into it. If you recall from Prologue 1, Nietzsche ends the whole discussion by talking about how he's ready to be a man again. And I posed the question about if he wasn't a man at that point, then what had he been? And so in Prologue 2 here, he's going to answer some of that. So we'll get right into it. He writes, Zarathustra descended from the mountain alone. Any Jane's Addiction fans out there, he was coming down the mountain, and no one was meeting him. When he entered the forest, however, there suddenly stood before him an old man who had left his holy hut to seek roots in the forest, and thus spoke the old man to Zarathustra. Now, this old man is typically referred to as a saint or a monk in most translations. In any event, he's a spiritual man, a holy man who's gone up into the mountains, and he's similar in Zarathustra in that he seems to have gone up there to seek solitude. And the concept of solitude is going to be really important in this second prologue. We're going to see that while both Zarathustra and the saint went up into the mountain to seek solitude, they came to very different understandings of that solitude and what the responsibility of solitude and wisdom are. So the saint continues, "This wanderer is no stranger to me. Many years ago he passed by. He was called Zarathustra, but he has changed." And so transformation, again, is going to be a central theme, especially in this prologue for Zarathustra. For Nietzsche, if you remember from Prologue 1, Nietzsche believes that teaching is there's a central ethic to teaching, that when a person gains wisdom, that they have a responsibility to go off and teach. It isn't enough to just accumulate wisdom and learning for oneself, but that we have a responsibility to go out and to share it with everybody. We'll recognize that motif when we're looking at something, say, for example, Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, that the hero is supposed to encounter something, overcome it, and not just kind of celebrate in their greatness, but to be able to come back and tell the rest of us about it. So there's something that's central to the hero about teaching, that it gives us a model for how we should live our lives heroically. Even if our Jungian archetype, as it were, we're not the hero, even if you're the jester, to have the courage to tell the jokes, if you're the caregiver, to have the courage to give care. No matter what your personality type is, there's something that we can derive from the hero, which is this idea that we should be able to come back and tell everybody about the things that we have overcome. Not to brag, but to give us a model. In Nietzsche's case here, remember, he believes that suffering is endemic to life, and that it's our obligation to overcome suffering, not to cower away from it, but to face it. And that idea that we should overcome suffering rather than cower away from it is going to be central to this division between Zarathustra and the saint that we see up here in the mountaintop. All right, so the saint continues. Back then, you carried your ashes up to the mountains. Will you now carry your fire into the valleys? Do you not fear the arsonist's punishment? So the saint is warning Zarathustra, if you're going down from the mountaintop here, aren't you worried that you're going to be punished for the fire that you spread? And of course, the fire that he's going to be spreading here is going to be wisdom. Anybody who wants to spread wisdom is going to pay the price. I talk in my classes sometimes about this idea that if you want to change the world, you're going to get shot, metaphorically or quite literally. Martin Luther King Jr. wanted to change the world, and he got shot. JFK wanted to change the world, he got shot. Lincoln wanted to change the world, he got shot. Gandhi wanted to change the world, he got shot. Anwar Sadat wanted to change the world, and he got shot. Even Jesus, while he didn't get shot, he was crucified. Anybody who wants to change the world is probably going to face the arsonist's punishment, anything that you try to set fire to. And by the way, just because you're facing persecution and punishment doesn't mean that you're Martin Luther King Jr. or Gandhi or Christ. What it just does mean is that you're going up against a power structure. And sometimes those are justified and sometimes they're not. In this case here, he's not making that value judgment, of course. The saint is just saying, don't you fear the arsonist's punishment? Don't you realize that you're going to be punished for what you've become? And if you change in your life, you're going to be punished for what you become. You're going to be punished by friends who will no longer talk to you, perhaps. You're going to be punished by family who's no longer going to be able to, who you'll no longer be able to relate to. And of course, they will no longer be able to relate to you, particularly in that direction, because you can always remember what you used to be. But it's very difficult for our loved ones who have known us our whole lives to be able to fathom what we've become. And so especially if you've changed in some dramatic way, especially if it's changing in some elevated way, learning, wisdom, becoming a good person, a religious conversion, it becomes very difficult for the people around us to relate to what we've become and to not feel like they've been left behind. And he continues, yes, I recognize Zarathustra. Pure are his eyes, and no loathing lurks around his mouth. Does he not move like a dancer? I love this. Yeah, I recognize Zarathustra. I see him. I know who this guy is. He was here a little while ago. He went up. I recognize him. But his eyes are pure. He sees things purely. And there's no loathing around his mouth. Man, I wish this for all of humanity, that there be no loathing around our mouths, that when we go and we speak to people, that we wouldn't speak to them with hatred, that we wouldn't speak down to them. There's this thing where we gain wisdom and we feel like there's something special about us because we've learned something or we've gained wisdom. And again, learning and wisdom, two completely distinct things. Hopefully your wisdom is informed by your learning, and hopefully your learning leads to wisdom. But there's sometimes a hiccup between the two, and oftentimes with some people I know there's a chasm between the two, myself included, of course, in that statement. But when we can approach people and have no loathing in our mouths, in other words, when we speak to people, we can speak to them with love. And I don't mean this in a hippy-dippy kind of, oh, we should all love one another, which we should, but when you gain wisdom and you use it to beat people down, then you're not really gaining wisdom. You're gaining knowledge, and you're using knowledge in a very, very bad way. To speak down to people, to attack people, to knock people down, there's nothing good in any of that. And in that kind of a case, your learning has made you a worse person. It would have been better for you to have never exited first grade or first grade, whatever the case may be. You were a better person when you were ignorant. And a lot of people are like this, and we'll know people like this, that much learning has made them wicked people. We don't need to look past the horrors of the 20th century, a lot of which were done by some of the most educated people on the planet. So we should not have this loathing in our mouths. And I'm not going to go into that statement, but man, that's beautiful. Does he not move like a dancer? And the saint continues, yes, I recognize Zarathustra. Zarathustra has become a child. An awakened one is Zarathustra. What will you do in the land of the sleepers? A lot going on here, of course. To refer to Zarathustra as a child is not a bad thing, man. If I ever referred to one of my students as a child, of course we can take it to be a bad thing. We can say, oh, it means that you lack understanding. And sometimes this is true. And sometimes the lack of the understanding that you can lack, that you should lack, is an understanding that you are incapable, that you cannot do something. In other words, children have imagination, and they aren't yet hampered by the things that are impossible. And that's a bad thing, of course. If you want to fly a plane, then you should be hampered by the things that are impossible. You should have some level of understanding about that. However, we should all maintain this element of the child in us that allows us to imagine about not just understanding what is, which is important, but also to come to an imagination of what could be, to imagine what we could become, to imagine what the world could become. And again, we should approach this sort of change with eyes wide open to understand why things are the way that they are. We shouldn't approach it like a child sometimes will say, oh my goodness, this is so stupid. I don't understand why the world does this. We should never allow ourselves to talk like that. We should first understand why the world is the way that it is. We should understand why people are the way that we are. And once we understand why things are the way that they are, now we can start to understand perhaps how things could be different, maybe even how things could be better. But first we have to understand why things are the way that they are. So to be a child is a good thing. We'll also notice, however, that children tend to just destroy things they don't understand or set fire to them or wander away. And there's certainly an element of this in what the saint is referring to as Zarathustra from the previous statement. Do you not fear the arsonist's punishment? Do you not fear what it is to be a child? And he continues, as in the sea, have you lived in solitude, and it has supported you. Alas, will you now go ashore? Alas, will you again haul your body by yourself? And so the saint here is reminding Zarathustra, or I guess just pointing out to him, you've done well in solitude. You've gained a great deal of wisdom. Shouldn't you remain in solitude? In other words, you've been out to sea for so long, and you've gained great things by being out at sea. Shouldn't you maybe stay at sea? Are you going to take yourself ashore now, where you didn't find wisdom, where nothing good is waiting for you? Are you going to take all of the good things that you've earned and learned and bring it ashore just to be attacked? He asks this rhetorically. He knows that Zarathustra is going, but we almost wonder why the saint has such an interest in trying to stop Zarathustra from going down. I didn't mention it before, but he ends paragraph 5 with, what will you do in the land of the sleepers? He refers to Zarathustra as an awakened one and asks him, what will you do in the land of the sleepers? He's trying to discourage Zarathustra from going out. Like almost, you can't change the world, they're asleep. And the things that you've gained, you should keep them to yourself. Stay in solitude. He's trying to convince Zarathustra to be more like him. And there's something about that in the world that we all kind of operate in such a way that we're trying to convince the world to be more like us, either cognizantly or unconsciously. In other words, if you're going about life being a good person, and you put things on your water bottle about live in kindness, be kind to people, and you put bumper stickers on your car about kindness, and you make that kind of one of your central ethics. You're trying to be a kind person, maybe, but moreover, you're telling the world to be kind, that you're trying to shape the world in that way. Although, I don't know anybody who's ever been changed by a bumper sticker. If you're out there, send me a message and let me know. On the other side of the coin, you can live a life of kindness and hopefully inspire other people to be kind, and in such a way, you can try to change the world. Or you can live a life of unkindness and be a real cruel jerk to people, real cruel son of a bitch to people. And if you do that, I can just about promise you that you're going to make the world a worse place, and you're going to make the world more cruel, because people are going to oftentimes give back what they give. It takes a really strong personality to be able to receive a polluted stream, as it were, and to not become polluted yourself. You have to be an absolute sea of ethic and character to receive even a polluted stream, a small stream, and not become polluted yourself. And so if you're going to live unkindly, you're going to influence the world to live unkindly, even if that's not your intent. Your intent might just be, I'm going to look out for myself. And by doing that, by the way, again, you make the world a harder place for everybody, even for yourself. Because now if you're living unkindly, people around you won't be kind, and you're going to have to live even more unkindly to overcome their elevated level of unkindness and so forth. And so we don't think of it this way, but consciously or unconsciously, we do shape the world around us. Here, whether the saint means to or not, he is trying to get Zarathustra to be more like him. The saint believes that he has figured it out, that the way to live is in solitude and to keep one's wisdom to oneself. He's going to go on to explain why. All right, so then Zarathustra continues in paragraphs 7 and 8. Zarathustra answered, I love mankind. I love that statement. I was recently talking to somebody who this came up, and I refer to myself as the eternal optimist, and I say that I absolutely love humanity. Even when I don't feel like I'm part of it, for whatever reason, I still love humanity. And one can say that that's it's a cause of deep suffering sometimes, when you love something so much that you don't feel like you're a part of. But he says here, I love mankind. And he's separated himself from mankind for years now, and he's going to descend back down and rejoin mankind. That answers part of that question from Prologue 1 at the very end, when he says that he's going to go become a man again. He's going to go join humanity again. By separating himself from humanity, he's made himself into a beast. And to be to live distinctly from society, as we said before, you need to either be a beast or a god. And of course, there is the third option, which is to be both, to be a beast and a god, and that is to be a philosopher. But when he says that he loves mankind, he realizes that to be human, you must live among humans. If you're going to be a god, you can separate yourself, and there's something to be said about that, that the most godlike aspects of us, in terms of wisdom and seeking understanding, that has to happen in solitude. And people who love their solitude, I think you're going to find sometimes, that what they're seeking is that deeper part of themselves. It's such a distinct, because there's two ways, I guess, of being a god. We can look at the God who loves the world so much that he gives his only begotten Son, and then we can look at the gods of ancient times, of the Romans especially, and the Greeks, who hate mankind. And I think that's what you find oftentimes with people who seek solitude. People seek solitude to get in touch with those deeper parts of themselves that allow them to recharge and go back into love humanity. And then you also find the person who hates humanity. We'll put it that way. The person who hates humanity, who separates themselves and sits in their mother's basement and munches on Cheetos and is playing video games, who says, I hate humanity, I hate people. Or worse yet, the people you see walk around with T-shirts that they brag about how much they hate people, or they post their memes about how much they hate people. And of course, what that really is an expression of how much they hate themselves. How much of a misanthrope they are towards everybody else is only a reflection of themselves. Because if you hate humanity, well, my goodness, you're part of humanity. And so it's really an expression of hatred. Hatred really starts at home, they say. Hatred really starts, I believe, within yourself. And when you hate yourself and you run out of that kind of burning, there's no more force to burn inside of yourself, well, the only place to go now is outside. And so you seek to burn down humanity as well. And so one of the ways that we can probably save humanity is to learn how to love ourselves. And I don't mean accept ourselves, snapping our fingers, loving me for who I am, or that god-awful statement, if you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best. You'll find that people who say that oftentimes are at their worst, very rarely ever at their best, or maybe their best is everybody else's worst. In any event, if we can start to love ourselves, and then maybe we can extend that to the rest of humanity, we'll live very differently. So Zarathustra here in paragraph 7 says, I love mankind. Despite all of the evil that's done by mankind, just keep in mind that all of the good that's done in the world is also done by mankind. Sure, all of the evil is done by mankind. This is true, but it takes so much to stand up against evil. Evil is easy to do for most people, but to stand up against it that's godlike. That's the hard thing to do. And so when you see someone perform evil, yes, shake your head. We should stand up against it. But when you see someone who stands up against it, that should not just renew your faith in humanity. I don't know what the word is, reestablish. It should maintain your faith in humanity, because humanity is absolutely worth saving. And that's one thing that education should teach us. He continues, paragraph 8, why, asked the saint, why did I go into the forest and the desert? Was it not because I loved men far too well? He continues in paragraph 9, now I love God. Men I do not love. Man is a thing too imperfect for me. Love of man would be fatal to me. My goodness, this is arrogant. This saint is arrogant. The only object that's worth his love is God, because everything else is just too imperfect. Nobody else deserves his wisdom. If that's the standard that he wanted to use, then God would never have interacted with him in the first place. He claims that up in this mountain he's discovered God, and that he went into the forest and the desert because he wanted to gain wisdom, and then once he was up there, he discovered God, and God is the only object worthy of his love. Well, if that's the case, then who's worthy of God's love? What object is worthy of God's love? Well, there is none. And so if he applied that standard to God, God never would have interacted with him. He would never have gained this wisdom that he so arrogantly flaunts now. As he's trying to talk Zarathustra out of reaching down, as it were. And I don't mean that in terms of value, because nobody is worth any more or less than anybody else. but reaching down in terms of the people who haven't sought wisdom. Zarathustra wants to take wisdom to the people. The saint wants to stop him from doing that. And again, man, imagine if the saint's God had applied that standard to him. God would never have reached down to the saint. And now the saint received something from God, he believes, and then he arrogantly possesses it, like somehow it came from him. That wisdom is a gift that he was given. And it's the same gift that Zarathustra now wants to take out to the world, to humanity. And of course, the saint in his arrogance is telling Zarathustra, don't do this. This is two fantastic expressions of how to be and how not to be. What you gain in wisdom, share with people, particularly those who ask, especially those who ask. And what people ask of you, don't withhold from them, because you've gained your wisdom, even if you feel like you've earned it and you've gone out and you've studied and you thought and all that, absolutely. But it's still a gift that you received. Share your gifts willingly. Don't hoard them. So he returns to paragraph 9. Now I love God. Man I do not love. Man is a thing too imperfect for me. Love of man would be fatal to me. We should love the things that are too imperfect for us. If that wasn't the case, no man would ever get married, because no woman would ever love us. I'm glad that women are able to love things that are less perfect than themselves. So Zarathustra answers in paragraph 10, did I talk of love? I'm bringing a gift to men. And just as we said earlier, wisdom is a gift, and he's bringing that gift to humanity. He's bringing it down to them. Nothing that they've necessarily earned. Again, most people haven't earned wisdom. We haven't thought too deeply about a lot of issues. We particularly haven't thought too deeply about a lot of the issues that we talk in depth about. We see this in regards to politics, morality. You'll hear people say things like, oh, that's not right. You shouldn't be, that's not right. People shouldn't be that way. But I wonder how much time we've really given to thinking about what's right and what's wrong and why. I wonder if we've spent way more time living our lives and then justifying it in retrospect, and essentially saying that what's right is what I do, what's wrong is what you do. He continues in paragraph 11, give them nothing, said the saint. Give them nothing. Instead, take part of their load and carry it with them. That will be most agreeable to them, if only it's agreeable to you. The saint's saying, don't give them anything, man. Learning has made this saint hate humanity. And I would suggest to you that it's easy to hate humanity because it's easy to look around and see what's wrong. It takes that childlike understanding to look around the world and see what's right, to see what's beautiful and good about the world. The saint has gone the very easy route. He has separated himself. He's gained some wisdom, and he's arrogantly possessed it to the point that he feels like he's special. And now, for this person, by the way, it's impossible for this person to return back to humanity, because to do so would be to have to admit that he was wrong, that he wasn't as great as he thought he was. It's also, by the way, impossible for him to teach humanity, because he's too full of himself. He doesn't love anybody. He says he only loves God, and what can you teach God? Nothing. So by the way, he sees himself as a God above humanity. So what can the saint possibly learn from humanity? Nothing. He won't allow himself to. Could he learn a lot? Oh, yeah. Everybody you meet can teach you something. You can learn something from everybody that you meet if you're willing, but you have to be willing. The saint here, he is not willing. He is not willing. So he continues, if, however, you want to give something to them, to mankind, give them no more than alms, and let them also beg for it. My God, give them just a little bit and make them beg for the little bit of wisdom that you can give them. And I know teachers like this. I know professors like this. I know a lot of people who are like this, that what little they'll give you, they're going to make you beg for it. Because, again, they elevate themselves above all others. Again, if you elevate yourself, well, I'll leave it at that. If you elevate yourself, ... you can fill in the blank there. If you elevate yourself, you haven't been elevated. And so if you're elevating yourself, again, it's a form of selfishness that it's kind of like, I've met some very smart people, and I know that they're smart because they've told me that they're smart. I never would have known it if they hadn't told me. And I'm sure we all know people like that who like to brag about how smart they are, and they're really not. But they'll tell you very proudly and openly and happily about how smart they are. If someone has to tell you that, then maybe they're not as smart as they think that they are. If you have to elevate yourself above other people, then perhaps you don't deserve the elevation that you're giving yourself. People will elevate you. People will also tear you down. This is true. Which do we focus on? Well, again, if you're Zarathustra, you can focus on the part that people will elevate you when you deserve it, and that people will tear you down. That's the saint's view, and which is true. They're both true, and that's probably this process of elevation. You'll be elevated by people, and other people will tear you down. People will say things about you that aren't true, and then others will tear you down. But you see in this whole process, you're still always kind of elevating up. You're always elevating up. And again, people will tear us down because they're jealous of us. True, but that's not where it stops. There's no period at the end of that. People will tear us down because they're jealous of us. People also tear us down because they misunderstand us. People will tear us down because they just genuinely disagree with us. People will tear us down for a whole variety of reasons, but the truth of the matter is that most people aren't against us. Most people are just out for themselves, and not even selfishly in the sense of, not caring about others. Most people probably just don't think that far out above themselves, and that's just a lack of wisdom, a lack of discernment. If you're wise and this bothers you, I would encourage you to examine yourself, because you weren't always wise. You probably also lived that way before, and I know maybe you're a real saint with a capital S who never did that to anybody, but by and large, many of us have been like this saint. That's the thing about this section. We see that Zarathustra and the saint, these are two aspects of the same person. These are two aspects of the same person. The person who loves humanity and loves mankind, and the person who hates humanity and hates mankind. The person who seeks wisdom and wants to share it. The person who gains wisdom and wants to hoard it because they want to feel like they're special and above other people. The person who wants to join humanity and be part of it. The person who wants to permanently separate themselves. The person who sees themselves as part of humanity, and the person who thinks that they're better than everybody else. If I were to ask you, which of these two people are you, the answer is probably yes. Just like if I were to ask you, are you happy or are you sad? Yes. Are you excited or are you bored? Yes. Yes. Are you joyous or are you melancholy? Are you, wise or are you stupid? The answer to all of these questions is probably yes, because we're all these two aspects. So he continues. If, however, you want to give something to them, give them no more than alms, and let them also beg for it. No, replied Zarathustra, I give no alms. I am not poor enough for that. This statement follows a theme in Nietzsche's writing. Later on in Zarathustra, he encounters a serpent as an adder. It bites, and he tells the serpent to take back his venom, take back his poison, that he's not wealthy enough to give it. What Nietzsche is saying here when he says, I give no alms, I'm not poor enough for that, is that to give alms, to give little bits of something to humanity or to a person generally, is to think of them as being inferior to you. I'm going to give you a little bit of wisdom because I have so much and I'm so much better than you that I'm going to give you a little something, little child. And I don't mean that in the positive way in this sense here. Zarathustra is saying that he's not he doesn't look down on humanity to give him just alms. He doesn't think that he's better than humanity. Again, he's rejoining humanity. The saint who thinks that he's better than humanity such that he can't even be part of it, he has to separate himself from it entirely. And not to avoid society's corruption again. The saint thinks that he has to separate himself from society because he's so much better than it, not because he can be influenced by it. And also, by the way, because society doesn't deserve his influence, his positive, wise influence. But in this sense here, Zarathustra is saying, I give no alms. I'm not poor enough for that. I don't look down on humanity. I'm not better than humanity. And so if humanity is in a poor condition, then so am I. And that's a powerful thing, man, to understand about our friends and the people around us. If my friends are in a bad way, then so am I. If the person I love is in a bad way, then so am I. If the person I love is happy and joyous, then so am I. And that doesn't mean that therefore you're weak and you're susceptible to the whims of everybody around you. It just means that there's a deep connection that you have to that person, such that if you love someone enough, as Neruda says, that their hand on your hand is the same. It's one hand on your. I'm sorry, your hand on their hand. Your hand on their chest is one hand, and that when one of you closes your eyes, it's the other who dreams. He says this in Sonnet 17, that you're like one person, and that's how close you are. When they're sad, you're sad. When they're happy, you're happy, and vice versa. And that's a great thing, because that means that you can always elevate one another's moods. The same is true about humanity. When humanity is in a hard way, so is Zarathustra, and he wants to go and do something about it. And we have to be careful with this, because of course there's always somebody in humanity who's always in a bad way, and to live is to suffer. Life is suffering. We don't get to choose not to suffer, but what we can do is choose what we're going to suffer for, and we need to find something to transcend that suffering, because there's so much of it in life and in existence and in the world. We must find something that makes it worthwhile. Otherwise, it's going to get the best of us. And so we shouldn't allow ourselves to constantly be living in depression and suffering. Yes, it's there, but there's also beauty, and hopefully if we can embrace that beauty that we see in the world and in others and in the actions of other people and in the ways that other people see the world, perhaps maybe then we can be elevated ourselves. So then the saint continues. The saint laughed at Zarathustra and spoke thus: "Then see to it that they accept your treasures. They are distrustful of hermits and do not believe we come with gifts." This is a really sarcastic comment. Oh, well then see to it that they accept your treasures. You love humanity so much, you're not better than them? Well then see to it that they accept your treasures. And they're distrustful of hermits. And this is absolutely true. We're distrustful of hermits. We're distrustful of people who live in solitude. We typically use solitude as humans as a punishment. When when somebody commits a crime, we send them away to a prison. And yes, they're with other prisoners, but I guarantee you, if there were no other prisoners there, they would be there by themselves. It's just a way of us saying, we're going to send you away from us. You're not worthy, you're not fit to live among us right now. And then if you're in prison and you're especially bad, you get sent to solitary confinement. You're so bad that you have to be sent away from being sent away. When somebody, especially today with cancel culture, somebody steps afoul of the mob, what do? Well, we cancel them. You can't be among us anymore. You have to be sent off to pay for your sins in solitude. You're no longer welcome among us, proper society. We send people away from us as a punishment. So when there's a person who goes away from society voluntarily, well, now we don't trust them. Well, why were they out there by themselves? Were they sent away? Did they do something bad? Do they have a guilty conscience? It's like when someone does something and they feel shame about it. And there's a difference between feeling shame and feeling guilt. You can feel shame for something that you didn't do wrong. And maybe sometimes we'll say, like, I feel guilty because people think I did something. We're just misusing the word. We can feel guilt about how we made a person feel, and we can feel shame about something that we did. And we can also feel shame about how we make people feel. But we typically, when this happens, we kind of go off by ourselves because we self-impose a type of solitude. I don't deserve to be among people right now. I don't deserve to be around people right now. I need to sequester myself. And you also see this today with cancel culture, with people who will separate themselves from everybody else because they feel shame about what they're being accused of, even if they didn't do it. And even if they just did a little bit of it, or even if they did it, but they think it's being overblown or whatever. So we just don't trust people who go off into solitude by themselves. We see it if you think back to being in school, and we saw that one kid who would hang out by themselves, and we'd say, wow, that kid's weird. They hang out by themselves. And we've covered already different ways that that person can see themselves and see the world around them. And so the hermit is absolutely true here. I'm sorry, the saint here, sorry. He refers to himself as the hermit. But he's absolutely true here. Society is distrustful of hermits. This society is distrustful of people who live in solitude. And they do not believe that we come with gifts. They believe that you've separated yourself from society. So either you're a guilty personality, so therefore we should shun you, or what do you know about society? You don't live in society. How could you possibly know what we go through and what we need? And again, we can cure that. The antidote is to understand that everybody we meet has something that we can learn from them. And it continues, our footsteps sound too loudly, so those who live the hermit, the people who live in solitude, our footsteps sound too loudly through the streets, and at night, when they are in bed and hear a man walking nearby long before sunrise, they may ask themselves, where's this thief going? In other words, when we see a person who's living outside the normal bounds, when they're walking around at night, when most people are not walking around, what's that person up to? Are they up to no good? Yeah, oftentimes they are. Sometimes we're not. Sometimes we're just out, away from people during the nighttime because we're collecting our thoughts, and that's how some people will live in solitude. We'll see people who go wandering around at night, but when we see it, because it's unusual, because it's not what most people do, we just think, they must be up to something. They must be up to something bad. This is why he says that their footsteps sound so loudly in the streets. When you hear a million people outside and the hustle and bustle, we don't think anything of a footstep. But when it's 2 a.m. and we hear footsteps outside of our house or walking down the street, that's a really loud footstep, man, because we think that person must be up to no good. When the person lives in solitude, we think they must be up to no good. And then when that person who lives in solitude now comes back to rejoin society, they must be up to no good. Maybe they're up to really, really good. Maybe they are up to no good. We have to be open to both possibilities. And again, society doesn't trust that person for good reason, but not always, because people who walk alone oftentimes have very deep ideas, original ideas, as evidenced here by Zarathustra, and as evidenced by nearly every deep thinker in the history of the world. And then the saint continues in paragraph 16, do not go to men, but stay in the forest. Go rather to the animals. Why not be like me, a bear among bears, a bird among birds? So the saint here describes himself as a bear, big, strong, tough. Nobody messes with a bear, especially a mama bear. And then he also refers to himself almost as a bird. The birds go wherever they want. Be like me, a big, strong creature that goes wherever he wants. He's not told by humanity where to go. The bird goes where it goes by choice. True. And so does humanity. So do you as a person, if you can live this way. What I'm saying is that freedom is to be able to go and be part of humanity by choice. Weakness is to be part of humanity by necessity. You should be independent. You should be strong. You should be capable of living on your own independently. But choose to live among humanity because it's a good thing that we should live among people. Again, we do typically think of solitariness as being a terrible thing when we enforce it on others. We kick people out of society. They don't belong to us. But there's also something to be said about choosing to be in solitude and then choosing to be among humanity. Whatever it is that you choose, you're exercising a choice, and that's freedom. The bird can choose where to go. So can you as a human. The bear is strong enough to enforce where it wants to go. The same should be true about you as a human. You should be strong enough to enforce where you want to go and free enough to decide where it is that you're going to go. But he asks this question, the saint does, why not be like me? So again, very clearly from earlier, the saint is trying to convince Zarathustra to be more like him, which we all do, either consciously or unconsciously. But it's a rhetorical question. Why not be like me? I don't know, saint. I can think of maybe 64 reasons we should not be like you. Zarathustra, though, is more gracious than me. He's not going to recount all of them. But he is trying to encourage him to not go among men, but to stay in the forest. And interesting, if you look at this geographically, Zarathustra earlier describes that he descended from the mountaintop alone, and no one met him. This goes back to paragraph 1. And then he entered the forest. So we understand that geographically, Zarathustra was up in the mountaintop, where the gods convene, and then he descended down into the forest. And so the saint is living in the forest, not at the mountaintop, which is closest to God, but down in the forest. He's not encouraging Zarathustra to go back up into the mountain and continue gaining wisdom. He's encouraging him to stay in the forest. Hey, hang out with me. Let's remake a world down here in the forest that'll start with just you and me. Again, it's self-serving. Obviously, it's the saint trying to say that he understands how life should be lived. But one also has to wonder if the saint is recognizing his own loneliness now. He wants Zarathustra to join him there because in his arrogance he has shunned humanity. He's been such a misanthrope that he's cast humanity away. And now he's feeling the effects of that, the brunt of that. And for him it sucks. He hates being alone. He's not just alone. Lots of people are alone. He instead feels lonely. And he wants Zarathustra to join him so that he won't be so damn lonely down there in the forest by himself. And so he continues, paragraph 17, and what does the saint do in the forest? Zarathustra, so what do you do down here? He even talks about him in third person. What does the saint do? Tell me about what you do around here. And the saint answered, I make songs and sing them, and in making songs I laugh and weep and growl and hum. Thus do I praise God. He doesn't begin, notice that statement, by saying, I praise God. And here's how. I sing and I hum. No, he begins by talking about what he does. And then at the very end, he says, thus do I praise God. Remember, Nietzsche's father was a Lutheran minister. And this is a very Lutheran statement here. Martin Luther believed that all music praised God in some form. And so the highest form of praise and worship was to sing songs, especially songs to God. And Nietzsche himself recalled as a composer. He's all about music, hung out with composers, was close with Richard Wagner for a while. And also notice that, again, Martin Luther, all music worships God. And Nietzsche had an obsession with the god Dionysus, god of wine and music and song and all that. So two very different ways of approaching music and worshiping God. For Nietzsche, although he doesn't believe in God or the gods, he does see this connection to this pagan god of Dionysus, and then this connection between that god and Martin Luther. And so he continues on this idea that music is one of the highest forms of worship. And for Nietzsche, although again he doesn't believe in God, he sees music as one of the highest forms of human expression, that humans do this thing that's above all of the other animals. Which is interesting, because earlier he does mention the birds, and of course we know that the birds do make music, just for different reasons. But again, the saint here is focusing on himself. He says what he does, and then he says, oh, and by doing this I praise God. Rather than opening up with saying, I praise God, and here's how I do it. Hopefully we see the difference between those two. So we continue from there. I make songs and sing them, and in making songs I laugh and weep and growl and hum. Thus do I praise God. With singing, weeping, laughing, growling, and humming do I praise the God who is my God. What do you bring us as a gift? And so this us here, kind of ambiguous. Is he referring to us as, again, including himself as humanity? Or is the saint now connecting himself to God? It's like, well, what do you bring us as a gift? As though he's worthy of being brought a gift. Recall earlier that the saint doesn't believe that humanity is worthy of receiving this gift of wisdom. And yet here he demands a gift from Zarathustra. What do you bring us as a gift? What gift do you bring us? Because we deserve it. Humanity, they don't deserve these gifts that you would bring, but us, we absolutely do. And again, he makes songs and sings them, and making songs he laughs and weeps and growls and hums. This is a reference to as Paul writes about the Holy Spirit, that the Holy Spirit interprets our groaning and our grunts into prayers for God. And so it's almost as though he's asking, like, this music is some form of a sacrifice, or some sort of a prayer, rather. That music is some sort of a prayer to God. Again, very Lutheran approach to understanding music. And so from there we get a pretty clear statement that this saint represents a Lutheran Christian. Dominant religion, again, at the time Nietzsche's father is a Lutheran minister, and so he set now this saint up as kind of like this pessimist, otherworldly person who believes in separating themselves from the rest of the world as a Christian. So again, Nietzsche, a savage critic of Christianity, but of course he misses this point here where, unlike the Christian, this saint believes that while they are otherworldly and while they're separated not of this world, that there's still an absolute responsibility, a charge, a duty for the Christian to share the wisdom that they've been given, the gospel. Here, this saint doesn't feel that obligation. So Nietzsche is illustrating this saint as kind of like the worst elements of what a Christian becomes. Not an expression of what a Christian should be, but an expression of what a Christian becomes, which Nietzsche often does in his writings. So in paragraph 20, he continues, when Zarathustra had heard these words, he bowed to the saint and said, what should I have to give you? Let me rather hurry away, lest I take something away from you. And thus they parted from one another, the old man and Zarathustra, just like two laughing boys. So Zarathustra is like, I have nothing to give you. I don't look down on you. I have no gift to give you. What could I possibly give you? You already have everything you could possibly need here in the forest. No, little sarcasm there. But he says, let me hurry away unless I take something away from you. I love that, man. That's let me hurry away before I take away some of your pessimism with me. You know, you're such a negative personality. Let me run from you before any of that negativity rubs off on me, before I become more like you. And of course they're laughing like two laughing boys, and so they're having a great time, and then they rush off. And then paragraph 21, some of Nietzsche's most famous words. When Zarathustra was alone, however, he said in his heart, could it be possible? This old saint in the forest has not yet heard of it, that God is dead. And again, one of Nietzsche's most famous statements, that God is dead. I always get into grief whenever I talk about this during class, because it's misunderstood. And I don't blame us for understanding it, because it sounds, 3 words, God is dead, seems pretty straightforward. And Nietzsche, again, as a savage critic of Christianity, he does mean this. Now, he doesn't mean it in the sense that God was ever alive and is now dead. He's arguing that this concept of God, and particularly what it is that God represents. For Nietzsche, God represents meaning and purpose in life. When we take God out of most people's lives, when we take God out of Western civilization, we take God out of the world, that causes people to lose largely our meaning and our purpose. There is so much suffering in this world that one of the only ways that we can make sense of it is that, yes, things are messed up now, but in the afterlife, and there's going to be this division between heaven and hell, and things will finally be set right. We hate the idea that things are not right in this world, and that things are never going to be set right. I'm suffering now, but it's okay. My meaning is that I'm going to receive a heavenly reward later on. So when we say something like God is dead, what Nietzsche means by that is we've now pulled all the meaning out of life. And again, as a savage critic of Christianity, Nietzsche is not celebrating this. He's not saying this is a really good thing that God is dead, because now we can get on with science. Remember, science brought us the atomic bomb. It didn't bring us whether or not we should use it. Science has brought us weapons of mass destruction, but it doesn't say a peep about whether or not we should use them. Nothing meaningful, anyway. It's values that tell us whether or not we should use these things and how we should use these things. It's also, of course, a function of wisdom. And so when we lose that direction, well, now we have no meaning. So if we have no meaning, then what matters? Well, nothing. Nothing matters. And this is something that Nietzsche warns us about, nihilism, this leveling tendency. If nothing matters, then nothing matters. Should I live or die? Nothing matters. Should I strive and overcome, or should I just cower in the corner and give up on life? It doesn't matter. Nothing matters. As soon as you lose your value systems and nothing matters, then humanity as a whole just becomes this thing that sits in the corner and mumbles to itself. And of course, what happens with people like that? Well, they lash out at everybody else. This is what we find with mass shooters or people, misanthropes, people who hate humanity, people who say these things like, we don't deserve dogs, we don't deserve animals. These are people who've probably never spent more than 5 minutes in nature to find out what nature is really like and what nature does to itself. That the fact that we can live is because we've separated ourselves from nature and gotten more in touch with these things that are, yes, we are a part of nature, and we do have these natural elements to us, like to lie, cheat, steal, and kill. But we have this other part of us as well, this spiritual element that tells us we can lie, cheat, and steal, but we should not. We should not lie. We should not steal. We should not bear false witness. We shouldn't do these things. That's the otherworldly part of us. That's the godly part of us. And as soon as you pull that godly part out of us, well, now we're just animals and nothing matters. So therefore, we just lash out at each other. And this very well might be one of the answers to the Fermi paradox, the great filter. Why is it that we find no civilizations out in the universe? Maybe they're not there. Or maybe it's because they've hit nihilism and they've lost that part of themselves that says we're better than the animals in the sense that we have values, and that therefore we can choose how to live, and we can choose not to give in to those worst parts of ourselves. And by worst part, what I mean is those destructive elements of ourselves. So yes, we should seek to maximize ourselves and to become the strongest version of ourselves, as Nietzsche says. But part of that is to do that through the full expression of ourselves. Not just the fact that we're animals, but man, we're so much more than that. You know, an animal doesn't share, but we can. We can choose to. That's the human part of us. Animals don't live by conscience. We can. Animals, we're so much more than that. That's what I'm saying. We're so much more than that, and we could be so much more than all of that. And that's something that's oftentimes lost on Nietzsche. That his writing here he is Zarathustra here. He wants to come back and tell us something about a greater part of ourselves that we could become. And this is something that's shared by all the great religions, which is the irony of it all, that there's something greater in us than what's in the world, and that it's something that we could become. That, I guess I can leave it at that. It's something that we could become. And what we could become, we can't possibly imagine. I mean, how can you imagine something that you haven't fully become yet? How can you possibly imagine something that you haven't fully experienced? We can grasp at it just a little bit. And hopefully that gives us enough of a taste to believe and have faith that there's something even greater on the other side of that small taste of what we have brought ourselves to become. So that's the end of Prologue 2. I hope you've gotten something useful out of it. And again, it's an overview. I'm sure lots of you who are going to watch this are going to have other insights and comments. Leave them for me. I'm always fascinated to hear what you guys have to say. Message, comment, all of that stuff. So end of Prologue 2. Stay tuned. Prologue 3 is on the way.